Hey guys, so I want to talk about real quick what could the WWF or WWF, what could they have done if Hulk Hogan stays with the AWA? What would have Vince was planning to go national regardless if he gets Hogan or not. He obviously had his eye on Hogan, likely since Rocky 3 probably. What could he have done? Because Vince was going to go national come hell or high water. And if he doesn't get Hogan, okay, I think obviously he eventually would have, right? Because no matter with Hogan or without, Vince was going to win the war because he just had the vision, he had the mind to do it, the will, and I don't think Vern had that. And Vince had the advantageous position of being in the New York market. But anyways, who could Vince have used if he doesn't get Hogan? Now, Jimmy Snuka's mentioned to someone. Now, the thing about Jimmy Snuka that people forget is he was a lot older than what he looked at this time. He was 40 years old at the time of December 83 when Hogan appeared with the WWF and Vince fired his first official shot of the war in St. Louis. So Vince now we're just gonna play fantasy here. Let's just say Snuka didn't have all the turmoil that he had in his personal life. Snuka was at the end of his prime. He was at the end of his prime. Now, he still was a top babyface. He still was a very viable babyface that you can have at the top of the card in the main event. You know, because in 84, he would main event against Piper. But in the long run, Snuka wasn't going to be the answer, even just based on his age. Okay, so there goes that. What about Sergeant Slaughter? He's the name that's brought up, and he exploded in 1984 as a babyface, and that whole Iron Sheik angle. Now, the problem with Slaughter is that his gimmick, the patriotic gimmick, wasn't something that I think would work in the long run of being a long-term number one babyface of a company. His gimmick was dependent on having evil foreign menaces. And you need your number one babyface to be more versatile. Now, the patriotic gimmick itself is not bad because Hulk Hogan was patriotic. Magnum TA, Dusty Rhodes, these were all patriotic guys, Hacksaw Duggan, but they weren't over-the-top patriotic. And Slaughter was, and it was good. It worked. Slaughter's babyface turn and that angle worked perfectly. But in the long run, to be your number one babyface, you need someone with a little more flexible or variety in their gimmick than just being over-the-top, in-your-face patriotic. Okay? Not every hill you face is going to be a foreign menace. And I think Slaughter was actually, as great as he was as a babyface, he was better as a heel. So, so there goes Slaughter, right? Kerry Von Erich's the name that, Vince wanted Kerry. That's definitely, you could see that by promoting the Von Erichs on their magazine and the All-American show. As great as Kerry is, and I think, like I did a video before, I think he would have made a great number one babyface for the AWA. For the WWF, I don't know if he could have carried the torch similar to the way Hogan did. I think he would have been I just don't know. So I'm not going to go with Kerry, okay? What about Paul Orndorff? Paul Orndorff was a babyface in 1985. He started out as a heel in WWF. Could Vince have used him as his number one overall babyface? I love Paul Orndorff. But that role that Hogan had, Orndorff couldn't have filled those shoes because of the, Hogan had the crossover appeal to the mainstream as this all-American babyface. Orndorff would be a great number one babyface in a lot of territories. But to be that guy that had Hogan's shoes, and Orndorff could have been a great number one babyface in the WWF in the early 80s. Like, let's say Backlund would have, I could easily see Orndorff be like the number one guy during Backlund's time. Like, let's say if Vince didn't want Backlund as champion, and I love Bob Backlund, by the way, he could have used, I could easily see Orndorff filling that role. Now this is the thing. I don't believe there was any single person that could fulfill the role that Hogan was given in the WWF to carry the torch of the national expansion. But Vince would have expanded nationally anyways. So my proposal is that Vince goes the traditional route. It was definitely time for Backlund to lose the title. I love Backlund, but he, in his last year as champion, it was obviously, that had run its course. The crew cut, the singlet, and just overall, the fans they're ready for something new. You got to remember, the 80s were a decade of change. The 80s was the MTV decade. The 80s was a flashy decade. And so the 80s was a fitness decade. And Bob Backlund was fit, don't get me wrong. But the 80s, the crowds of the 80s were different than the 70s. So the fans were ready for something new. So my proposal is this. And this is going to probably sound contradictory, but I wouldn't even go the superhero babyface route like the Hulk Hogan route. I wouldn't do that. I would wait for Hogan. If he stays with Vern, I'm going to wait for him, because I'm going to, if you're Vince, you're going to win that war because you have the vision. You have the willpower. You have the New York marketing machine behind you. The biggest markets in the country. So what I do is I go the traditional route. I have Backlund lose the title to the Iron Sheik the same way it happened. And since Hogan's probably going to stay with the AWA for a little bit, maybe even get the title, I bring in Rick Martel. And I put the WWF World title on Rick Martel. And you may say, well, he's kind of like that similar wrestler to Bob Backlund. Not necessarily. He had a different style. He had a flashier style than Bob Backlund in the ring. I love Backlund. But Rick Martel had the traditional 80s babyface look, where I think Backlund had more of a 70s babyface look. 70s, very early 80s. Martel had that quintessential 80s babyface look. And if the Northeast fans loved Backlund, they would have loved Martel. Young, his wrestling style was exciting. Vince could have kept that formula, bringing in the larger-than-life Hills and rotate them to face Martel. Now, I think that Vince may have had to go about the national expansion a little differently. I don't think he would have went balls to the wall the way he did when he had Hogan, because if you notice, McMahon was just expanding everywhere, putting his TV in all these markets, going into arenas. I think he would have had been more strategic in his national expansion. It would have took him longer to take over, but he eventually would have done it. Why? Because it didn't matter who Vern had and Vince had. Vince had the brain. I can't stand Vince McMahon, but let's give the devil his due. The guy had the willpower, the vision. He just would have had to go about it differently. Probably no rock and wrestling connection. But he, by sheer just genius, he would have done it. And so that's what I would have done. I wouldn't have tried to have someone instead of Hogan. I would have went the traditional route. Bring in Hills, larger than life Hills. You're in the biggest markets. You're going to get the talent. There's going to be no shortage of talent. You still go after a lot of the talent that you went after. And you keep the title on Martel until Hogan runs his course in the AWA. Until Hogan runs his course in the AWA. You keep the title on Martel. And you still have Piper. You can still do a lot of good things. You have Snooki, you still have strong baby faces and Snuka and Slaughter that they're kind of your colorful baby faces. And that's what I would have done. I wouldn't have tried to get somebody to replace Hogan instead of Hogan to do the same thing Hogan did, because I just think he was that valuable and unique. But I think regardless, he would have went to Vince. Vince was going to win no matter what. It would have made it taken him longer. He would have may have had to adjust his strategy. What I think he would have had to do, he would have had to expand a little slower, but still expand. Probably, you know, he could probably cross over still with MTV. It would have been probably a little harder or different, but he didn't need that. He was in the number one market in the world, the number one population center, the Northeast in the country. All the advantages were with Vince, not to mention his vision, his willpower, his strategy. You know, Vern, love Vern Gagne and the Gagnes, but they keep Hogan. It's just going to prolong the inevitable. And maybe that would have been good. Maybe that's all we could have hoped for, was prolonging the inevitable and having a more healthy wrestling landscape longer, because, by mid-1986, the writing was on the wall. The territories were really in severe decline. Not severe, but they were declining. Even the ones like World Class and UWF, Mid-South, and AWA. So that's what I would have done. I would have brought in Martel as champion and just hold on until I get Hogan. And honestly, a lot of people criticize Vern for not putting the strap on Hogan. I actually think, in retrospect, Vern made the right decision, because I think Hogan was going to the WWF regardless. I think Hogan was going to the WWF regardless. Now, imagine if Vern had put the title on Hogan on Super Sunday, and then December comes and Hogan just leaves. I mean, he's AWA champion. He just basically abandons the title and the promotion, and then he goes to WWF and wins the title. That would have been a bad look for Vern. So in retrospect, Vern did the right thing, because Hogan was going to the WWF no matter how much Vern kissed Hogan's ass. And I'm not saying he had to kiss his ass, but I'm just saying that it didn't matter. Hogan was going for the big lights and the bright nights in the New York City skyline, baby. And that's just the way it is. But anyways, guys, that's what I would have done. I just would have put the title on Martel, go more the traditional route for a couple years, and, still do some of the stuff that Vince did. And his takeover just would have been more delayed. Anyways, bye.